She didn't just report the news, she made it. She was the true embodiment of what a trailblazer is. When female journalists were expected to stay writing about the feminine arts, she put her money where her mouth is, exploring the frontiers of gender roles and equality, earning worldwide respect for her investigative reporting and bravery, tackling news leads no man dared touch. Come learn about the trailblazing, stunt reporting, world-traveling reporter, Nellie Bly. Hey everyone, welcome back to Hobby Teaching. My name's Matt, and I'm a teacher. I love to teach the moments and people of history that we don't always get to talk about in the traditional classroom. So, I created this podcast. Let's begin. Born May 5th, 1864, in Cochrane Mills, Pennsylvania, Elizabeth Jane Cochrane was the daughter of Michael and Mary Jane Cochrane. Mary Jane was Michael's second wife, and Elizabeth was his 13th of 15 children. Michael was a hard-working mill worker who would later save up enough money to buy all of the land surrounding his family farm with the mill that he once worked. In his life, he will become a central figure of Cochrane's Mill, which would later become Armstrong County, Pennsylvania. He will serve as a merchant, as the postmaster, even as the associate judge of the county. Elizabeth is going to live a somewhat privileged life, as her father is one of the most prominent figures in the town. Elizabeth herself will also be a really well-known figure of the town because not only is she the daughter of the founder, but her favorite color was pink, and she used to wear pink everywhere she went. So she earned a nickname that's going to follow her all the way through life of Pink or Pinky. Unfortunately, when Elizabeth turned 6 years old, her father's going to pass away. Michael Cochrane did not have a will, and therefore all of his money, his fortune, was split evenly amongst all 15 of his children after a legal battle. Elizabeth's mother, Mary Jane, was suddenly without money. She was without the security of her husband in a time when women weren't given the same opportunities as men to be independent money earners. So she sold the family mansion, moved out, and married for the security. Elizabeth's new stepfather was an alcoholic, and he was abusive to her mother. The marriage will not last very long before Mary Jane is going to sue for divorce. Back in the early to mid 1800s, women could not just file for divorce. There had to be a trial, and a jury had to find good reason for the divorce. So Mary Jane is going to sue for the divorce and will have to provide evidence that her husband has not performed as a good and faithful husband should. And it's at this point we actually see Elizabeth at 14 years old is going to show the courage and testify for her mother. She will testify to the court of her stepfather's infamous cruelty. She tells the court about the abuse her mother endures. She tells the court how she and her siblings are terrified when her stepfather returns home and begins to drink because she knows that he is going to bring anger and hate to the household and unfortunately physically harm her mother. The court will grant Mary Jane the divorce, and she will have to move once again to escape the situation that they were living in. Mary Jane, Elizabeth, and the rest of the family will move to Apollo, Pennsylvania, where Elizabeth will enroll in the Indiana Normal School. The Indiana Normal School was a teacher's college where women could go and learn to be a teacher, which was one of the few jobs that women were afforded and could take to be independent in society. Unfortunately, The family doesn't have enough money to allow Elizabeth to continue this education. She will only be able to attend for one term before she's going to have to return back home penniless. The family will then move to Allegheny City, which will later be annexed into Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Here, Elizabeth and her mother are going to open a boarding home where people can go and live for longer terms, but not necessarily like an apartment would be. Her brothers have a hard time finding steady work. They are working jobs that are physically demanding and oftentimes seasonal. So Elizabeth also needs to find steady work that goes beyond just this boarding home that she and her mother are running. And running a boarding home, keeping that open, is a really difficult work in its own right of cleaning and looking after people and cooking meals for dozens of people at a time. It's difficult work. And Elizabeth wants more than that for her family. So, just by chance, the local newspaper called the Pittsburgh Dispatch publishes an article criticizing women in the workplace. Elizabeth is reading this letter and she is just incensed to read this, that someone would be so ignorant to believe that women aren't or shouldn't be afforded the same independence and liberties and wage as a man in this world. So she grabs a pen and paper and she writes a letter back to the newspaper, back to the editor, calling for more opportunities for women, explaining the difficulties and the hardships that women face day to day, especially women who no longer have a husband or a family that they can rely on for that security in this male dominated world at the time. The editor of the Pittsburgh Dispatch, George Madden, loves the fire and the passion and the writing of Elizabeth. And he contacts back and he offers her a job. He asks her to come and join the newspaper. And Elizabeth is going to take up that offer. Now, at this point, Elizabeth Cochran is going to take the pen name Nellie Bly. She chose this name from a famous song at the time by the same name, Nellie Bly. The song was written by Stephen Foster, who actually knew a real life person named Nellie Bly, who oftentimes came around and listened to him and his friends make music. So he wrote this light-hearted song that was kind of meant to be kind of like a nursery rhyme of sorts. So Elizabeth Cochran takes on that pen name of Nellie Bly. Now, at this point in this podcast, I will begin to refer to Elizabeth Cochran as Nellie Bly because we are talking about the feats that the journalist, the writer Nellie Bly accomplished. It's important for me to also point out that most certainly throughout her life, Nellie would go by Elizabeth in her personal life. In fact, it even looks like in her private life with some of the closest friends and family that she had, they still called her Pinky. So she still held on to her name. But for this purpose of this podcast, we're going to go ahead and continue to call her Nellie Bly because we're talking about the feats of the writer, but also because that's who she is remembered as in history, as that pen name Nellie Bly. It won't be long before Nellie Bly becomes a popular writer in Pittsburgh. However, she's limited to these pieces that only address women. The editors don't want Nellie to write larger pieces for the newspaper that might interest all sorts of different readers. They're only really interested in her writing for women. Nellie takes on this challenge. She begins to write investigative pieces on poor working girls. She explores themes of feminism. She talks about divorce inequality, even calling out lawmakers to reform divorce laws, that women shouldn't have to go to court and have to testify and prove that their husband is abusive or isn't being a faithful husband in order for them to get a divorce. And after a divorce, women should be able to receive some sort of compensation if they're not going to be allowed the same independence that men are when choosing careers and getting jobs. This type of bold writing gains her a large following. But the Pittsburgh Dispatch wants Nellie to focus on stories about fashion and flowers and these light stories that, quite frankly, Nellie believes is beneath her and her talents. So she does a very bold thing. She decides she wants to be a foreign correspondent in Mexico. She travels south and she lives in Mexico. However, this job will only last for about 6 months. Originally, the plan was for Nellie to just report on the people, the culture, the food of Mexico. However, she returns to her roots. What she notices very quickly upon arriving in Mexico is that Mexico is not at all a democracy. It is a dictatorship under the leadership of Porfirio Diaz. Very quickly, she sees the rampant poverty on the streets of Mexico. She sees that this democracy that Diaz claims is Mexico is not true. The ideals of free speech are all false, and she calls out Diaz for all of this. Local reporters that she was working with are arrested because they dared to call out Diaz. So she takes up her pen. She starts writing articles and she starts sending things into newspapers, calling out Diaz as well. She says that Diaz is a tyrant. She accuses him of rigging democracies and rigging elections. This is going to upset Porfirio Diaz. He is a dictator and he does not like this. And he wants Nellie Bly arrested. So she very, very quickly leaves the country. She smuggles out all of her notes and all of the columns that she was writing. She actually folds them up and hides them and escapes Mexico before she can be arrested, before her articles can be confiscated from her. She returns back to the dispatch and they put her back on her old beat, back to writing about fashion and things these male editors believe women care about. And Nellie isn't happy, and so she quits. She refuses. She says, I'm not writing this anymore. And in her very last message to the dispatch, she publishes, quote, I'm off for New York. Look out for me. In 1887, Nellie Bly arrives in New York City. She wants to continue to be a writer and she's on the lookout for different newspapers that she can work for. When she arrives in New York, she sees the struggle of the many immigrants that are arriving in the city from Ellis Island, and she wants to write an investigative paper about that. She arrives at the New York World, one of the largest and most influential newspapers in all of the United States. How she got to the desk of managing editor John Cockerill is not 100% known. I would have a good feeling that she talked her way to his desk and maybe pushed past security just as well to get there, because she saw an opportunity and she wanted it and she was going to take it. So she's in front of editor John Cockerill and she pitches this story about the immigrants. And he's just not very interested. He's uninterested in the story, and he's skeptical of Nellie Bly. Sure, she was popular in Pittsburgh and maybe in Pennsylvania, but here in New York, in the big city, she's not as popular. So he's not as sure of her as a writer. But upon talking with her, they pitch an idea. On Blackwell's Island, there is a hospital. And I'll use the terms that was used back in the late 1800s. It was a woman's lunatic asylum. And it was a well known secret that mental health was not taken as seriously as it should have been. And Cockrell knows that there is a story there. And if there's an investigative story that can be told, and Nellie Bly is willing to do it, maybe she should try to infiltrate the asylum and write a story about it. So they go to the owner of the New York World, Joseph Pulitzer, and they pitch this idea to him. And he agrees to it. He says, yeah, let's do that. And he ups the ante. He says, if you can get in there and you can create a report based off of 10 days in the asylum, when you return, I will give you a permanent spot as a writer for the newspaper. No limits. She will not be writing just for women or writing on soft topics. She will get to write about the things she wants to write about permanently for the paper. Nellie Bly accepts. The plan is she will be admitted to the hospital, and then after 10 days, an attorney will go to the hospital and secure her release from the grounds. Now, this has only happened one time before. A reporter named Julius Chambers wrote a column way back in 1872 about the Bloomingdale Asylum in New York. Nellie Bly understands that this isn't going to be easy and that this is going to be a very difficult assignment. But she is committed to this and she's going to make it happen. In order to be admitted to the hospital, Nellie needed to feign a mental illness. So she rents a low-cost boarding house and she stays up for several nights practicing what she calls a ghostly stare. Then she goes out and she starts wandering the streets, acting erratically. Within 24 hours, she will be arrested and brought before a judge who will order her to Bellevue Hospital, where doctors will recommend that she go to Blackwell's Island. Several different doctors are going to speak with her, and they are going to diagnose her as, quote, insane, after only seeing her for a few minutes. Once Nellie is inside, what she witnesses is horrific. She sees several different forms of torture that she will witness and she will experience. For starters, the hospital was only built to house a few hundred people. Instead, there was over 1,000 people in the hospital. It was crammed. There was not enough room for everyone. Women were subjected to ice baths where attendants and nurses would dump buckets of ice water over their heads and then rub their skin raw with dirty cloths. Patients were given large doses of morphine to sedate them. The food they ate were covered in bugs and were stale. Nellie describes some of the bread she ate as covered with spiders. From 6 a.m. to 8 p.m., patients were expected to sit in straight back wooden benches without any moving, without any talking. They were not allowed to read, they weren't allowed to sew, there were no other activities for them to ease the boredom of. Nellie even states that if patients were not already insane, the sheer boredom of sitting on those wooden benches would be enough to drive someone insane. On top of it all, nurses were physically abusive, slapping, choking, and mocking patients to their faces. And even worse, many of the nurses and attendants weren't even medically trained. Many of them were convicts from the nearby penitentiaries. that the asylum hired to save money. Nellie witnessed ropes being used as restraints and wooden cribs used as makeshift cells for women to sleep in overnight. And probably the most horrific part of everything she uncovered, Nellie found that most of the women who were in the hospital were not mentally ill. Many of the women were immigrants. They were immigrants who couldn't speak English very well. Many of the women who were sent to the hospital were diagnosed as insane by doctors who were too busy or just didn't want to listen to women. Another portion of the women who were in the hospital were women who were sent there by their husbands or their families because they were, quote, a nuisance. And all of this, unfortunately, was just not uncommon for the time in the United States. Mental health, medical health of women was not taken seriously. They were overlooked, underfunded, and largely just ignored. After 10 days in the hospital, the New York World sends their attorney and they free Nellie from the grounds. Nellie will publish her report in 2 parts. She titled it 10 Days in the Madhouse, which quickly become front page news all across the country. In a time where mental health was not taken very seriously, her report is going to spur an immediate grand jury investigation, and New York State is going to increase their funds for mental hospitals and enact stricter controls for asylums everywhere. And this isn't just New York State. What she uncovered and what she wrote starts a movement all across the United States for everyone, and especially the medical community, to begin taking mental illness seriously and to hopefully start taking women's health seriously. Nellie's stunt is going to usher in a new phase of journalism, this undercover journalism. And I use that word stunt not as a disparaging term, but as a term that they actually used themselves, that this was stunt journalism, because she put her own livelihood, her own health in danger when she did this. President Teddy Roosevelt is going to call this muckraking. And although Nellie Bly wasn't necessarily the first to begin this, she is going to be one of the most widely popular muckrakers in all of the United States with this investigative reporting, her article 10 Days in the Madhouse. But she's going to inspire many others to also do their own investigative journalism. We see Upton St. Clair's The Jungle exploring the meatpacking industry. Ida Tarbell's The History of Standard Oil, where she exposes the Rockefellers and their cutthroat tactics to eliminate competitors and create a monopoly on oil. Jacob Riis and How the Other Half Lives used photography to expose New York's tenement housing and forced legislators to pass laws to help people live in healthier and safer environments. And Ida B. Wells, whose article The Red Record brought worldwide attention to the southern United States and the practice of lynching. All of this is going to come from Nellie Bly's willingness to put herself on the line and to report the facts, the true facts, to everyone. Her tenacity brought a change in the way things were reported in the newspapers. And Nellie isn't going to stop there. She has this permanent role with the World now, And her straightforward writing, mixed with personal thoughts, feelings, and observations on underreported topics, is going to earn her a strong following of fans. She is giving a voice to the people who didn't have a voice at this time. And she becomes wildly popular because of it. She's going to continue to write on topics that are extremely sensitive. She talks about the black market for buying infants, the treatment of women prisoners by the police. She reports on the Pullman Railroad strike, but not on the side of the railroads, but on the side of the strikers. She writes about Susan B. Anthony. She interviews John L. Sullivan. She even interviews serial killer Lizzie Halliday. She's unafraid to report on things that a lot of people otherwise would ignore or be too afraid to report on their own. For Nellie to do something like this, it cannot be overstated how brave she was to stand up and to write about the things she wrote about. In 1889, Nellie Bly's gonna have a brand new idea. A book was published by Jules Verne called Around the World in 80 Days. And Nellie decides she can do it faster. So she goes to her editor and she tells him this. She goes, "You know, it'd be a really cool article if I traveled around the world in less than 80 days, faster than the book says." And her editor laughs at her. He tells her that that goal cannot be accomplished, that she would need the help of a man to escort her everywhere, that she would literally carry too much luggage on this trip and it would surely slow her down. He says, quote, "No one but a man can do this," end quote. And if you don't know already who Nellie Bly is and her thoughts and what she does, you will certainly know now, because her response is, quote, "Very well, start the man, and I'll start the same day for some other newspaper and beat him," end quote. Nellie's adventurous and competitive spirit won him over. He had no choice. He knew that she wasn't joking about this, that either he lets her do this or she will leave and she will go to another newspaper. He knows this. And she's challenging these gender roles. She's challenging this editor, a job, her dream job, right? And for her to be as bold as to say, "Well, I'll just go to another newspaper then," that's a big deal. That's a big deal. These are competitive jobs, especially for a woman at this time. So she's going to get to travel the world now. On November 14th, 1889, she will begin her journey in the New York harbor. Her journey will take her all the way through England, France, Italy, the Suez Canal, Sri Lanka, Singapore, Hong Kong, and Japan. In total, she will travel 24,899 miles, mostly by steamboat and steam engine. Along the way, she had some pretty cool and fun things happen to her. When she arrived in France, she actually got to meet Jules Verne, the man who wrote Around the World in 80 Days. At first, he was very doubtful that she could beat his fictional record. He was sure that she wouldn't be able to do that. But after sitting down and talking with her and getting to know her, she completely changed his mind. He was excited to see her try to do this, and he cheered her on, hoping that she would break this record. When she arrived in Singapore, she she bought a monkey and named him McGinty. And she traveled the rest of the way to New York with McGinty, who supposedly caused a lot of trouble on the boats across the Pacific. But she kept him, and she brought him with her back to New York. When she arrived in San Francisco, Joseph Pulitzer is actually going to charter a private train, and he dubs it the Bly Special, where she is going to travel at record speeds to get to New York. It's said that a massive crowd was there waiting for her, and at every train station that she passed through, and she didn't stop, she kept going. People lined the railways, hoping just to catch a glimpse of her waving from the back of the train. And on January 25th, 1890, Nellie will complete her journey around the world in 72 days, 6 hours, 11 minutes, and 14 seconds. Oh, and remember when her editor said that she would carry too much luggage, that it would slow her down? She did all of this wearing one single dress and carrying one small bag. Her journey is going to inspire many others to also attempt the feat. Most noticeably, journalist Elizabeth Bisland Wetmore for the Cosmopolitan will also try this trip. She will not be able to do it as fast as Bly does, and she actually starts the trip around the same time that Nellie did, going the opposite direction. And Nellie didn't even know about it until she arrived in Singapore, I believe. Another notable person that we need to talk about would be George Francis Train. He had actually traveled around the world in 80 days. He was the inspiration for Jules Vernon's book. And by all means, he's an eccentric. He's an eccentric person. He was really, really upset when Nellie Bly broke his record. He showed up in San Francisco to heckle Nellie Bly when she arrived. He wandered the streets of New York. He demanded people call him Citizen Train. He refused to shake hands with people because he could feel their psychic energy. He was just a strange man, and for whatever reason, he was really upset to see Nellie Bly break his record. So 4 months later, he attempts the record again, and he beats it. He's able to travel around the world in 67 days. But it doesn't sound like, from my research, that anybody even cared. And good, because we're talking about Nellie Bly, not Citizen Train. So, at the age of 31 and at the height of her career and her fame, Nellie's gonna get married. She marries Robert Seaman, a 73-year-old businessman. To many, this seemed very strange because they met on a train and then were married only a few days later. A lot of people thought that she was marrying him for his money, marrying him for security. But if there's anything that we know about Nellie Bly already, it's that she is incredibly independent. And from all accounts, it does sound like she was deeply devoted to him. She was committed to him, and she fiercely protected him. Maybe she was tired of the rat race. Maybe she was tired of traveling the world in 72 days. Who knows? But it does sound like she certainly was committed to him. And any person who would say that she married him for the money clearly doesn't know Nellie Bly. When Robert passes away, she will inherit his business. And she proves herself to be a fairly shrewd businesswoman, especially when we look at how she treats her workers. She is incredibly fair and kind to everybody. She is going to be one of the first business persons, man or woman, to offer health care to her employees. She's going to open free recreational facilities like libraries and gymnasiums for her employees to go and spend time. When her employees come up with new innovative ways to produce, she patents their ideas for them and then will pay them fairly for their contributions to the advancements of factories or whatever it might be. There are so many different things that she improved upon with her employees. She helped with the invention of the 55-gallon oil barrel. She improved on the milk can for a more sanitary and safe way to travel on trains. The stackable trash can refined productions for boilers and water heaters, and someone helped her find a better way to streamline production of these oil barrels in her own factory. And she patents these under the name of her employees, and she gives them a fair pay for their contributions. That's something in the time of Rockefeller is really unheard of. Unfortunately, although she is fantastic to her employees, she isn't great with finances, and many of the same employees are going to take advantage of her. We are going to see massive fraud occur by her employees. They are going to take advantage of her and take a lot of money from her, as well as a lot of different legal challenges over her ownership of the factory. So, unfortunately, she goes bankrupt and she loses the company. Nellie will return to journalism, where she will cover the suffragette movement, where she actually accurately predicts that women would receive the right to vote by 1920. At the outbreak of World War I, she's actually already overseas in Vienna helping a friend out. So when war breaks out, rather than return back to the United States, she actually goes to the front lines to report on the war. She heads to Austria, and she's, like I said, she's on the front lines. She doesn't go to the government protected sites. She goes to the front lines to talk to soldiers. She visits hospitals. She's reporting firsthand what she is seeing and what the soldiers are seeing. And she sends this all back to the New York Evening Journal, and they use all of her work as a war correspondent. At some point on the front lines, she is actually arrested under suspicion of being a British spy. But she eventually works her way out of that, and she continues her role as a foreign war correspondent. In 1919, she will return home from World War I to New York, where she will continue her writing supporting the working class people. She uses her pen to offer advice to working class women. She undergoes many efforts to help orphaned children and babies find homes. And this does not mean that she's just writing in the newspaper. She is actually using her personal time to vet families, to spend time with the children, to help them find a forever home that fits them and who they are, that will make them happy and healthy. All in all, Nellie Bly, though she is tired and getting older, she is a champion of the working class people. And tired and weary and without the fortune of money she once had. On January 27, 1922, Nellie Bly will die from complications with pneumonia at the age of 57 years old. Arthur Brisbane memorialized Nellie, saying, quote, "Nellie Bly was the best reporter in America. She was a pioneer of the type of journalism that does not just describe the world, but tries to fix it. She was the first to show that a woman could do anything a man could do, and often do it better. It's rare to find people who are brave enough and smart enough to chase after their dreams. It's one thing to pen a letter to an editor, and another to place your physical body in harm's way to uncover a story. Nellie Bly is so fascinating because she's the opposite of the rags to riches story. She was born into wealth and privilege, and she lost it all after her father's untimely death. Still, through her writings and her actions, it is apparent she learned the lessons from her hard-working father. She never forgot the sacrifices she and her mother had to make in order to survive in a world that rarely thought about women outside of being teachers, nurses, and mothers. Nellie worked tirelessly as a feminist and a human rights activist. She cared deeply of the people around her and worked constantly to prove that gender did not determine the incredible feats that all humans can do. She proved that she wasn't just a stunt performer. She wasn't just a female journalist making headlines as a novelty. She was serious about her craft. She was a skilled writer who used her skills to protect, defend, and speak up for those suffering, man or woman or child. She was a champion of the people. Whether in an asylum, traveling the entirety of the globe, in a factory, or at war, she would prove her pen was the mightiest weapon of all. But most importantly, that woman could do it too. Thanks for listening, everyone. If you'd like to get in contact with me, please subscribe here on YouTube. You can also follow me on Instagram or email me at hobbyteaching@gmail.com. We're all teachers in this world, and I would love to hear from you as well. Tune in next Tuesday as we explore the tragic history of the Houston riot of 1917. See you in the next one.